What if classism does not look like something my students see in their lives? Can they identify it? That was the focus of my project through a series of 4 lessons, 50 minutes long. I have never used the word classism in my civics or economic classes, but my students talk about oppression, unfairness. They speak of inequity, but have never used that word. Before I start a project in my class, I always start with a vocabulary exercise. Quiz Trade is a Kagan activity which gets students walking around the classroom, teaching and learning vocabulary by trading cards with questions and answers, and then switching after both students have conversed. I always start Quiz Trade out with a discussion before with words that they will see in their questions. Vocabulary words that they might not know, words like precedent or diplomatic. This helps the students' confidence when teaching the questions on their cards. The students will be researching for court cases later, and understanding the vocabulary will be imperative for making that argument later. After students have learned the vocabulary, and we have gone over it, now is time for Quiz Trade. Students get a card each, and they give a high five. Once they give a high five, one student reads a question to another student, and they coach them in the answer. Once they have the answer, then they switch cards. And they do this throughout the entire 30 minutes of class. After the students have watched the PowerPoint on Quiz Trade, everybody stands up, every student has a card, and they walk around, high-five each other, and ask each other questions. After both pairs of students are done asking each other questions, they switch and then go to somebody else, high-five the next person, and start again. They do this until everybody has seen the card. Once the students have seen every card, or there's been enough time that has gone by where they should have seen every card, students sit back down and we discuss any issues that they might have had, anything they didn't understand, like why one particular answer was that answer, and we sit down and talk about it, or we discuss it. The students now have a good vocabulary going into the next day, where we can start talking about the actual court cases and getting into the jargon that is used in the Supreme Court, so that hopefully the students have obtained the knowledge from the day before, and we get moving forward. Day 2 starts with the PowerPoint on the Supreme Court, and we discuss the United States Supreme Court and talk about why the Supreme Court takes certain cases, and it being that the Supreme Court only looks at federal law and cases regarding the Constitution. So we get into that discussion and talk about issues that deal with the Supreme Court. After we have discussed the Supreme Court PowerPoint, and we have talked about certain vocab words like petitioner, respondent, writ of certiorari, we discuss the fact that they will be looking at 4 court cases. And those 4 court cases were called up by the Supreme Court at certain times because there was a certain climate in the country at that time. Students are now put into groups where each group has 4 students, and each group of students is either a petitioner or a respondent for a certain case. Once they receive the information for that particular case, then those students will start to get to work. They start to figure out what the arguments are for that particular case, whether they're petitioner or the respondent. The class received 4 cases. 2 groups each got 1 case, one for petitioner, one respondent. 4 cases given were Gregg versus Georgia, Obergefell versus Hodges, TLO versus New Jersey, and Tinker versus Des Moines. All of these cases deal with areas of the Constitution and deal with areas of oppression. The 4 cases that have been given to the students, I picked out personally because I believe the students can get something out of these cases that has a hint of classism in it. And so my hope is that by day 4, when we get to the Socratic seminar, that they actually have a good solid idea of the oppression that happened in these cases. The first case that I gave students was the Gregg versus Georgia case, which is a death penalty case, which the 8th Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. Gregg lost the case, and he was put to death. What I want students to hopefully see out of it is that Gregg was poor, and did that have a possible reason to why the Supreme Court didn't rule in his favor. Second case I gave students was New Jersey versus TLO, and this is a 4th Amendment case, which is unlawful search and seizure, and it also deals with school, which makes it a hot topic for students. Do schools have the right to look in somebody's purse, in their bag, whatever, if they suspect something on them? The third case I gave students was Tinker versus Des Moines, and this is another case that deals with school, but it is a First Amendment case, and it is about students who are wearing armbands in protest to the Vietnam War. And so again, it asks the question, do schools have the right to, in this case, suppress students' freedom of expression? The last case that I give the students is Obergefell versus Hodges, which is about gay marriage, deals with the 14th Amendment, equality for all people. And what I want to get out of the students here is to see if they can recognize classism in this case. There's probably more classism in this particular court case than any of the others. On to the third day. The students use the first 10 minutes of class to prepare their arguments, either as the petitioner or respondent for the particular case. And then the rest of the class is the students arguing that side of their case in front of the rest of the class. And this helps to build their knowledge of these cases and get a better idea of what they believe. The students on day 3 came dressed up. They were really prepared and ready to go for their cases. And when they presented in the manner that they were supposed to. You can see the document on your left that tells them how they need to speak. And so they used that and made the argument. It went extremely well. I do this petitioner and respondent every semester, and so I'm pretty used to doing it. I have a little different spin on it since doing this project, adding the classism theme to it on the last day. So this is a little bit different, but the students came well prepared, and the cases wound up like they did in the Supreme Court. Students elect to be 9 Supreme Court justices when they are not the ones arguing. So they actually make the decision based on the arguments the students make, either as the petitioner or the respondent. And so the students get the practice from the argument side. They also get the practice from the judicial side of actually listening to the argument and making a decision based on. The third day is really important leading up to the Socratic seminar on the 4th day, because they are learning how to argue the cases that they have, and also they have learned argumentative skills that they can use the following day. Also, they know what they're arguing about, which makes a big difference. So on the fourth day, the classroom is set up in a fishbowl Socratic seminar. And what a fishbowl is that there is an inner circle and there is an outer circle. The students on the inner circle are the only ones that can speak, and the students on the outer circle can pass forward notes to continue the conversation, but they're not allowed to speak. Halfway through the class, they switch. So I started this Socratic seminar off with a particular question, an easy question to kind of get things moving. And the question was, what did you think of your particular court case? Did you agree with the Supreme Court decision? Why or why not? And this kind of gets things moving, gets students talking, and at least discussing the actual case to prepare them. So the second question that I posed is my classism question, which is, do you think the Supreme Court decision would have been different if the person in that court case was wealthier, was a different race, a different sex? Would any of those things make a difference in the Supreme Court decision? The second question that I asked is really has to do with about getting that idea of classism out. For example, Greg versus Georgia. Greg is poor. Had he been wealthy, would that have made a difference? Would the Supreme Court have made a different decision if Greg was wealthy? Those are the types of things that I'm trying to get the students to talk and think about in a Socratic seminar. The results of the Socratic seminar and this project were tremendous. 92% of the students were involved in the discussion in the Socratic seminar. Matter of fact, the lesson ended up going 2 days because they were so interested in the discussions. And there was a lot that came out of this discussions, a lot of arguments and discussions about racism, sexism, classism, even though they don't use the word classism or even sexism for that matter. Those discussions were brought up quite a bit as far as wealthy versus poor, race divisions, and even the divisions within the race. And it was very, very interesting. I would do this with the classism theme or other isms. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the discussions from the students and what we got out of it. I think if I were to make any changes to it, I would actually increase the length of it. They didn't have enough time for research, so I'd probably make this a 1 to 2 week project.